The village of Carrow had always lived in the shadow of the dense, towering forest that surrounded it on three sides. The final barrier, a ridge of jagged cliffs that blocked the only path out. Isolated from the world, the village had long kept to its ways, quiet, self-sufficient, and cautious of the ancient woods that whispered of old magic. They had grown used to the silence, broken only by the sounds of farming, hunting, and the crackle of hearth fires. But now, that silence was broken by something far darker. Fear hung over the village like a storm cloud. It started with the disappearance of the miller's youngest son. He had been playing in the fields near dusk, chasing after his sister, when in the span of a heartbeat, he was gone. His parents searched frantically, calling his name into the night, but there was no answer, only the howling of the wind through the trees. Then the butcher's daughter vanished, and another child, and another. The village had not known such horror in living memory. One by one, the children were taken without a trace, leaving behind only empty beds and shattered families. Parents huddled together at night, their doors barred, clutching their remaining children close. But no matter what they did, the children continued to disappear. At first, the villagers suspected wolves or bandits. Search parties were formed, torches blazing as they scoured the forest. But they found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed the children whole. Then came the sightings. In the dead of night, as the wind howled through the trees, shadowy figures began to appear at the edge of the forest. They were tall, impossibly thin, their forms shifting and twisting like smoke caught in the breeze. Some said they had seen glowing eyes staring out from the darkness, watching the village with an eerie, predatory hunger. The villagers called them the Shadow Weavers. No one dared to approach them. Fear gripped the village, but no one could offer a solution. The elder, a man who had lived through countless harvests and winters, had no wisdom to guide them. The villagers' lives, once simple and secure, had been upended by something they could not understand. In desperation, the elder turned to the ancient text, a tome that had been passed down from one generation to the next, barely touched in decades. The elder spent days locked in the village's tiny chapel, poring over the old scrolls and records, searching for answers. The village grew restless, waiting for some glimmer of hope. When the elder finally emerged, his face was grave. "It is as we feared," the elder said to the gathered villagers. "The Shadow Weavers are not mere spirits. They are ancient, malevolent beings, bound to this land by a curse older than any of us can remember. They come for our children because we're tainted by the sins of our ancestors. They're searching." Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd. "But there is a way to stop them," the elder continued, though his voice was heavy with the weight of the truth he was about to reveal. "The texts, they speak of a single chance. The Weavers can only be defeated by someone of the Telemont bloodline, someone that carries the blood of the origins of this malignancy. Only such a person can stand against them." The villagers fell into an uneasy silence. All eyes slowly turned to Adon. Adon stood near the back of the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always been an outsider in the village, A mere boy with no family, no parents to claim him. Raised by old Mara, the village healer, Adon had never known his true lineage. He had often wondered about his past, but no one ever spoke of it. Now he was beginning to understand why. "You can't be serious," old Mara protested, stepping forward, her face pale with anger. "He's just a boy. You can't send him out there to face those things. He doesn't even know who he is." The elder's gaze softened, but his resolve remained firm. "Mara, we have no choice. The Weavers will keep coming. They'll take every child if we do nothing. Adon is our only hope." Adon felt the weight of the village's fear pressing down on him. The thought of facing the Shadow Weavers alone filled him with a cold dread. But deep down, he knew the village needed him. The missing children, their faces haunted him. Their parents' grief was a weight that no one should have to bear. If it's the only way," Adon whispered, his voice shaking. Mara turned to him, her eyes wide with fear and sadness. "Adon, you don't have to do this. There has to be another way." But Adon knew there wasn't. He saw it in the faces of the villagers, in the elder's solemn expression. This was his fate, the destiny that had been waiting for him all along. "I'll do it," he said, louder this time, his voice carrying over the crowd, silencing the murmurs. The elder nodded slowly, his eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. "May the gods be with you, Adon." The preparations were brief. Adon was given a small pouch of food and water, along with a silver amulet that the elder claimed would protect him from the Weaver's magic. But as Adon held the amulet in his hand, its cool surface pressing into his palm, he felt no sense of safety. The villagers watched in silence as Adon made his way to the edge of the forest, the place where the Weavers had been seen most often. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the village. The wind stirred the trees, filling the air with the sound of rustling leaves. Old Mara was the only one who walked with him to the forest's edge. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but trembling. "You don't have to do this, Adon," she whispered. "There's still time to turn back." Adon shook his head. "If I don't go, they'll take more children. I can't let that happen." Mara's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she looked as if she might pull him back, hold him close and never let him go. But then, with a deep sigh, she let her hand fall to her side. "You're a brave boy," she said quietly. "Too brave for your own good." Adon tried to muster a smile, but it faltered. He was terrified, but he couldn't let that show. Not now. With a final nod to Mara, he turned and stepped into the forest. The forest was dark, its trees towering overhead like sentinels guarding a forbidden land. The ground was uneven, covered in thick roots and fallen branches, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Every step Adon took seemed to echo in the stillness, his breath loud in his ears. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, leaving only the dim light of the moon filtering through the canopy. Adon kept his eyes forward, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that gnawed at his insides. After what felt like hours, he finally came to a small clearing. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, were the Shadow Weavers. They were tall, their forms shrouded in darkness, their shapes constantly shifting and flickering like shadows cast by a flame. Their faces were featureless, their bodies almost formless, yet there was an undeniable presence to them, a cold energy that made Adon's skin crawl. For a moment, Adon stood frozen, unsure of what to do. He clutched the silver amulet around his neck, praying that it would protect him. Useless. The weavers made no move to attack. Instead, they seemed to watch him, their heads tilting slightly, as if they were waiting for something. Then, from the center of the clearing, a figure emerged. A woman. She was different from the others, her form more solid, yet still translucent, yet more defined. She was tall and graceful, her long black hair flowing down her back like a river of darkness. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her pale skin seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Adon's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen her before, yet there was something undeniably familiar about her. "Adon," she said softly, her voice carrying through the clearing like a whisper on the wind. "You've come at last." Adon swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "I am your mother." The words hit Adon like a physical blow. His mother? That couldn't be possible. He'd never known his parents. He'd always been told they were dead. "You can't be," Adon said, shifting his head. "My mother died before I was born." The woman stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "I am dead, Adon. But it was after you were born that I fled the village, thinking to sacrifice myself, hoping that the Shadow Weavers would come for me, sparing you and the children of the next generation. But alas, I died in the forest in the most foolish way, falling in a ravine and striking my head upon a stone." Adon took a step back, his mind racing. This couldn't be. His mother had simply left him, abandoning him to be raised by old Mara. But even as he wrestled with the impossibility of the situation, something deep inside him stirred. A faint, distant memory of a face, a voice, a lullaby sung softly in the dark. "No," Adon whispered, shaking his head. You can't be her. I would have known." The woman, his mother, continued to smile, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I left to protect you. The Weavers are not just spirits of darkness, Adon. They are bound by blood to this land, to our family. Every few generations, someone of our line must join them. It's the price we pay for the sins of those who came before." Adon's heart skipped a beat, the weight of her words sinking in. "Our family?" His voice faltered. But why me? Why now?" His mother's expression softened, her glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You are the last, Adon. Our line has thinned over the centuries. I was the one who was supposed to join them before you, but I fled. The thought of leaving you behind was torment. I thought I could protect you, but the curse always finds its way. And now, the Weavers have come to claim you." The ground seemed to shift beneath Adon's feet as he processed what she was saying. His legs felt weak, his head swimming with confusion and terror. "Claim me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I was supposed to stop them." His mother sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth. "You are, Adon. But the only way to stop them, truly stop them, is to join them." to sacrifice yourself so that the village can be spared. That is the price of our bloodline." Adon's blood turned to ice. He stumbled backwards, shaking his head in disbelief. No, that can't be. There's got to be another way. There has to be." His mother stepped closer, her presence both comforting and terrifying. "There is no other way, my son. This is the curse that has plagued our family for generations. The Weavers cannot be defeated by force or trickery. They are bound to us, and only by willingly joining them can the village be saved." Tears welled in Adon's eyes, blurring his vision. His mind raced, grasping for any other option, any solution that didn't involve sacrificing his life to the shadows. He'd been prepared to fight, to stand against the darkness, but this was something far worse than anything he had imagined. "But what happens after I join them?" Adon asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What will happen to the village?" His mother's gaze darkened, her expression turning grim. "You will save the village, Adon, but only for a time. The Weavers will be appeased for a generation, perhaps two. But they will return, as they always do. And when they do, there will be no one left to stop them. You're the last of our bloodline. Once you join them, there will be no one to continue the cycle." The full weight of the truth crashed down on Adon, suffocating him like a heavy shroud. His sacrifice would only delay the inevitable. He would save the village now, but in doing so, he would doom it in the future. The children would be spared, for a while, but eventually the Weavers would return, and the village would fall with no one left to defend it. Adon's legs gave way and he sank to his knees in the clearing, his chest heaving with silent sobs. He'd come here thinking he could be a hero, that he could save the village and stop the darkness once and for all. But now, he was faced with the impossible choice. The choice of sacrificing himself for a temporary reprieve, or letting the Weavers continue their deadly hunt. His mother knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Adon. I never should have left. I meant to take my place with the Weavers, and perhaps spare you this burden." Adon looked up at her, his tear-streaked face full of anguish. "Is there no way to stop this?" Her expression broke, pain etched into every line of her face. "Your sacrifice is the only way, my son. I'm sorry. I wanted more time with you." They knelt together in the clearing, mother and son reunited by the weight of their shared fate, though the moment felt hollow and bitter. Adon's mind whirled with conflicting emotions: fear, anger, sorrow. He wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but deep down he knew there was no escape. "I don't want to die," Adon whispered, his voice cracking with fear. "I don't want to become one of them." His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled him into an embrace, holding him tightly, as if she could shield him from the inevitable. "I know, my love, I know. But this is our burden to bear." Adon clung to her, his heart aching with despair. He had always wondered about his parents, imagined them as distant figures lost to the world. But now that he had found his mother, now that he knew the truth, he wished he hadn't. The truth was far more terrible than the mystery. For what felt like an eternity, they sat in silence, the shadows of the weavers swirling around them, patient and unrelenting, void of emotion, watching. Adon's mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions, but one truth rose above the rest. He couldn't let more children be taken, even if it meant his life, even if it meant the village's eventual doom. He had to save them now. With trembling hands, Adon gently pulled away from his mother's embrace. His eyes were red from crying, but there was a new resolve in them, a quiet, determined strength that he hadn't known he possessed. "I'll do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll join them." His mother's face crumpled with grief, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of his decision. "I wish there was another way." Adon swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. Maybe when the time comes, the village will find another way to fight them. Maybe someone else will come along." His mother said nothing, her expression haunted by the knowledge that there would be no one left. Adon was the last, and once he was gone, the village's fate would be sealed. Slowly, Adon stood, his legs shaking beneath him. He looked around the clearing, at the shifting forms of the weavers, at the towering trees that seemed to close in on him. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay, the wind whispering secrets he couldn't understand. He took a deep breath and stepped forward towards the weavers. As he approached, the shadows seemed to part for him, welcoming him into their fold. The cold, dark energy that had once filled him with terror now felt familiar, almost comforting. The weavers made no move to stop him. They had been waiting for him all along. Adon turned back one last time, his eyes meeting his mother's. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her figure bathed in a soft glow of moonlight, her face streaked with tears. "Goodbye," he whispered, and then, with a final step, Adon disappeared into the shadows. The village of Carrow never saw Adon again. The weavers vanished as mysteriously as they had come, and the children stopped disappearing. Life returned to a fragile sense of normalcy, though the memory of the boy who sacrificed himself for the sake of the village was with them for many years. But the elder knew the truth. He discovered through study of the ancient text that Adon's sacrifice had only delayed the inevitable. The Shadow Weavers would return, as they always did. And the next time, there would be no one left to stop them. He told himself that someday he would pass the knowledge on, but for now it would be better for the villagers if he let them mourn the loss of their children and live in peace. For now, the village was safe, but the shadows that lingered at the edge of the forest were a constant reminder of the price that had been paid, and the price that would one day come due again.